Election night 2016. The Democrats were poised to win. Women around the country were casting their votes and taking their I voted stickers and placing them on the graves of suffragists. But as the night progressed, we realized it would not be so. We would not elect the first female president of the United States. You're watching Access to Justice, and I'm attorney Delia Parker Mims. Today, we're going to talk about what happened. Why did Hillary Clinton not win, and what does the electoral process really mean? Does your vote really count? Do we need to have a conversation now about whether or not it's still a good thing to have that process as part of our government selection of president? Today, we have Professor and Executive Director of the Denton County Democratic Party, Travis Cooper.
Hi.
And he's going to talk with us about what the electoral process means because he has all of that information. And here's the thing, Travis. Being the Executive Director of the Denton County Democratic Party, also being a political science professor at Tarrant County Community College, is that where you're at?
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
in the Southeast campus.
Okay. That means that it must have hurt, and you understand why. More than the average person. So we're going to talk about that today. But first, briefly, tell the audience a little bit about yourself so they can understand what type of background you have and why you understand all of this.
Okay, yeah, I went to Texas Women's University here in Denton for my bachelor's and master's in government. I teach American government and Texas government for Tarrant County Community College for their dual credit program at the Arlington and Mansfield high schools, actually. So I get to teach how the process works to people right before they get to join the process and get to vote. So it's pretty fun. And I've been working with the Democratic Party. I helped on the President Obama's campaign in 2008 for Tarrant County. And then I've been with the Democratic Party in Denton County for, since 2014 now, just after the Wendy Davis campaign. But yeah, actually, as far as the voting and electoral college, that's something that I like to actually really emphasize, especially during this semester, during the election years, when I have them at 18 and get them in my...
Well, I bet this year proved to be a great year for you to have that discussion with those who were about to join the process. Did you have any in your class who had turned 18 or were eligible to vote and participated?
Yeah, actually, it was the first year that several of my dual credit high school kids were able to vote. It was their first time, and so it was interesting to hear kind of a fresh perspective, one that's kind of hasn't been tainted yet by partisan politics and by the drudge of working on all these elections. So that part was fun. It was a little stressful talking about the content of this election with kids in high school. That was a little upsetting and disappointing, and I know it was for a lot of other teachers.
Well, when you mean the content, do you mean what both the candidates were discussing, or what became more the focal point?
It was what was the focal point. We never got to talk about policy, so I had to bring the policy to my students, because every time we got a chance to start bringing up policy, Donald Trump said something again, right? We get a little bit of policy after debate, and then the videos come out with the horrible things Donald Trump says. And I have to go and talk to 16, 17, 18-year-old kids about kind of the circus around the campaign, when really other elections we got to talk about. When Barack Obama and Mitt Romney ran against each other, it was easy. We can come in, we can debate both sides, we can talk about the arguments, we can say, what do you think is the best way to handle health care? Which candidate do you think would best handle immigration? We got to talk about that.
And in fact, in that election, Barack Obama actually told the American people that this is a referendum on what you think about the affordable health care. So they were talking policy. They were debating policy.
Yes.
And
both sides.
They went, both sides were. And so it came down to listening to those particular issues. And of course, this election, it came down to character versus character. I would say character in both camps is kind of how I looked at it. But how did your students feel on that Wednesday?
My first class coming in on that Wednesday was difficult. I had a student who is Muslim asked me if she was going to get deported now. She's born in Arlington.
Right.
And she asked me, am I going to be deported now? And I had to tell her, well, no, we were fine. She's like, but my parents weren't born here. I'm like, and that's a hard thing to get through as a government teacher when you're trying to teach them, and you're just trying to teach them how the government works, how it functions, the process of the election. You're not trying to get in on these
Right.
issues. But there they are
Yeah.
crying in your classroom the next day.
I think a lot of teachers experience that throughout the country. You might have seen a lot of stories where teachers had to address that.
Yeah.
And I know my children came home and mentioned things like that, about that, what was going on and how people were feeling. And children, particularly students,
Yeah.
were feeling what they were processing, what they heard throughout the election.
Yeah, it was tough. I would say that my high school kids probably handled it as well as I can ask them to. When the girl asked if she was going to be deported, the other kids responded, "Oh, it's okay, we got your back." And that is encouraging. Now, my college kids, my night classes, my older students, there seemed to be a lot more anger, urgency, frustration. How did 2 million people plus people vote for this person and the other one lose? I think
Right.
that was the narrative at the night class. So for my kids, for the young ones, for the 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they were concerned about each other and what can we do to protect each other. And then my night class, they were concerned about what just happened to me. Did my vote just get thrown in the trash?
Right.
What was this about?
We saw springing up across the country different protests, and many of them were young people. Do you think that had anything to do with millennials not understanding that, as time goes on, things will work themselves out, and they want immediate change?
For a lot of them, this is their first time. This is their first election. So I would say, look at the reaction of the first-time voters in 2000. Look at them when they saw, and by nowhere near the margin in which Hillary beat Donald Trump in the popular vote, but they saw Al Gore beat George W. Bush in the popular vote, and then Bush. And if that's your first experience, that's kind of a tough introduction. That's kind of a gut check into American politics. So I think that what you're seeing is the people who've gone through this before, they trust the system more. They've been involved in the system more. They know that we have the legislator to help protect us from whatever craziness Donald Trump might try to do. We know that we have these safeguards in place, and we've seen them in place, and we've trusted them. But the young people, if you think about it, if this is your first experience with the system, if this is your first experience in an election, you see 2.6 million people now vote, in addition, vote for somebody else. And then the loser win. How can you therefore trust those safeguards? How do you trust the system? How do you trust that the Senate is not going to let Donald Trump go crazy with treaties? How do you trust that the House is not going to let him sell us up the river on trade? How do you trust that if the first introduction you had was a nuanced election based off of this electoral college? That's a little tricky.
Well, that's a good segue into what we're going to discuss today. And fortunately for you, as being a professor, you will be able to teach the younger generation more what the electoral process is. I would think, in general, the American people are sitting and wondering, what happened? What happened? All the polls did not work out. Democrats were poised to win. At least they thought so. And then election night, it tanked because of a process that we have in place. So let's talk about the Electoral College and what that is, and how it works, and why you can win the popular vote but still not be the president of the United States. So what is the Electoral College?
Okay, well, to get into the Electoral College, we need to kind of go back to when we're writing our Constitution and the arguments we have over representation. And what does it mean to be represented? And that was something that they were really concerned about. We all know the founders were concerned about consolidating power around popularity. And it's very easy to do that after passionate events or moments like war or things. So we wanted a government that would be
Excuse me, you said consolidating power
Yeah.
on popularity.
Correct.
What does that mean?
We didn't want the same constituency controlling every branch of government. We did not want, we wanted a separation of powers. We wanted the Senate and the House to work independently from the president, to work independently from the judiciary. But if you have this one same pool of deciders on each of those branches of government, then they're going to be beholden to the same interest.
Okay.
And that was something they were worried about. So what they wanted to do was say the House of Representatives are going to be voted on every 2 years by the people. And again, their definition of the people was very narrow at the time. And then who selected the Senate was originally the state legislators, because the Senate was there to represent the states and make good laws for the states. So that's why you have district-based House members for you and your neighbors, and senators selected by the state. Now the president's supposed to represent the nation and help us make a good administration. That's what Hamilton talked about. The mark of a good government is its ability to create a good administration. So for the president, we designed a method of having electors cast their ballot, and the states vote on those electors. So it's a little bit more complicated than a simple popular vote. It's not, we all vote for candidate A and B, and who gets the most votes wins.
Right.
And there was a lot of reasons. It's hard to say that the founders had one particular reason of doing anything. There were 55 people that signed this Constitution. Right. So there was a lot of different reasons that they had. Hamilton was concerned, particularly, that an event, a war, personality, something would drive us temporarily to support someone who may not be qualified for president. Mm-hmm. So they designed a system in which we would select people to make the decision for president for us. Now, we can argue the utility of whether that's good now or not, but at that time, there was great concern from Hamilton that we would either have a president that was too held by foreign interest, because we were a brand new nation at this point, or that we would have a president that's elected that did not quite understand the system of Republican government that they were trying to create.
Okay, so were those the main two issues addressed? Was that in the Federalist Papers?
In the 68th essay of the Federalist Papers, Hamilton addresses particularly that we would have a problem with a president that's held to foreign interest, but that's taken care of in Article 2 of the Constitution. That's taken care of by preventing the president from receiving any benefit from a foreign nation.
Okay.
And then he was concerned that someone unfit would rise to office. And he said that is handled by the Electoral College. And again, we can deal with the utility, but the reason was for them to act as a buffer. And people can say this is elitist, but Hamilton was. Now,
well, it's interesting that those were the two interests that the Electoral College was designed to protect. Yes. The competency of the person elected as well as their foreign interests. We're still hearing that ringing today in our 2016 election. So it seems as though there is some validity in how the process was designed.
There's some. I think that the problem we have today is that the founders were very deliberate in their understanding of government and its functions, but they were not very deliberate in their understanding of math. And this is now the 5th time since this process has been in place in which the Electoral College has not voted as this popular vote has decided. This is only the 5th time that's happened. So if you want to see reform or the first measures of reforming this, you have to go back to the first time that this happened. So in 1828, when John Quincy Adams was elected president, he did not win the popular vote. He did, however, win that electoral college vote. And this did cause controversy. This caused the states to start questioning, how do we now address this? And some states, 29 states, decided, plus the District of Columbia, what they did was they passed state laws requiring their electors to vote as their state popular votes. Other states didn't do that. They didn't want to.
Now, which state did that?
There's 29 states.
29 of them, okay.
Plus D.C. Texas is not one of those states. We do not have a law in place requiring our electors. And that's in part because Texas, I mean, we came in, you know, after the John Quincy Adams debacle, and we saw what happened, but we preferred this idea of allowing our electors to make their decision. So we haven't yet to write any such law.
Okay, but as of today, we still have 29 states that require that?
Yes. Now, whether or not those laws are constitutionally valid, that hasn't really been tested. We've had what we call faithless electors before. A faithless elector is what we call an elector who votes against the will of their state. In 2004, an elector from Minnesota refused to vote for John Kerry and instead cast his vote for John Edwards. So we've had a faithless electors before, but in the ones and the twos, not in, I think today we have 8 electors that are talking about possibly not voting for the state.
How does one become an elector? Seems to be one of the most critical positions you could actually be elected to do.
Yeah.
Is it an elected position or is it an appointed position?
Okay, that's a complicated decision. So yes, it is an elected position, but it's elected by the delegates who go to that party's state convention. Mm-hmm. So what happened, let's use Texas for the example, because it's possible to do all the states. So in Texas, we have a Republican Party and a Democratic Party convention. Mm-hmm. When the Republicans and Democrats meet at their state conventions, they will elect amongst them electors who will represent Texas should the Republican or Democratic candidate win. So even though each party will elect 38 electors for Texas, only the slate of electors of the winning party will sit in Austin on December 19th.
Okay.
So both the Democrats had their slate of electors, the Republicans had theirs. Since Donald Trump won Texas, the Republican slate of electors is who will go to Austin on the 19th.
Okay. And we've been hearing some talk amongst one of the Republican electors in Texas saying that they will not cast their vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, Texas is definitely going to be the interesting state to watch the electors from, because we have 38. That's the second most valuable state. So we have more electors to look at. And because there was a lot of tension between Senator Cruz and Donald Trump throughout this campaign. So remember, the electors are seated before the candidates are decided in a lot of these states. Texas is, our conventions were held in June. Mm-hmm. So we already had our electors decided before Donald Trump won that nomination. So there's a lot of electors out there that may, and we wouldn't know until we survey them all, but they may be part of that Never Trump movement. Now, one of those electors is in Texas. Now, he did write a post, I believe, an article, I believe it was for the New York Times, that was his argument against voting for Donald Trump, and he will show up in Austin and cast his vote for someone else. I believe it's undecided at this time. Okay. But we've also had one other elector resign flat out, refusing to vote for Donald Trump.
And what state was that? Was that Texas?
Here in Texas. So we've had 2, and that shows to the strength of that division between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, is the fact that we've now had 2 Texas electors.
Right, and we might have seen something similar had Hillary won with the Bernie Sanders
Oh, absolutely.
crowd.
There's an elector.
It might have been similar to.
Correct. There's an elector in Washington State that actually said that they would not vote, that they were still going to vote for Bernie Sanders. But in Washington State, they actually do have a law that requires them to vote, but it's a $1,000 fine, and they said, I'll pay my $1,000.
Right. All right. So now we have a good understanding of where the Electoral College came from, what the purpose of it was, and it's actually has a lot of relevancy when you explain it, of course. let's talk about you've taught us how people become electors. You got to go to the convention and get voted by your party to become the elector. Let's talk about two things. Number one, how did we come to the numbers that each state have? What is the purpose of that? And then the second thing will be, what happens if a majority of the electors do not vote for the person who has been the presidential elected candidate? Okay.
So as far as how many electors are out there, there is a total of 538 presidential electors. So we get that number from all the members of the legislature. That's all the members of the House, 435, plus 100 senators. We plus 3 for Washington, D.C., that's 538. You need to win half plus 1, so that's 270 electors. Every state is valued based on how many members of the federal legislature they have. Texas has 36 House members, we have 2 senators, so we have 38 members of the Electoral College.
Okay.
The least any place can be worth is 3. 2 House members, 2 senators, 1 House member, like Wyoming.
Okay. So
And they
that's
get
where
3.
that's where those numbers
And that's
come
why
from.
D.C. only gets 3. They can be worth as many as the least populous state. 48 of the 48 of the 50 states give their electors out based on the popular vote. You win by 1 vote or 1 million votes, you get all of our electors, winner take all. Now, in New Hampshire and in Nebraska, they divide their electoral college votes by their congressional districts. So they have what they call a proportional delegation.
Right.
It's a little different in those 2 states. So it's possible to win 1 instead of all in New Hampshire. But in Texas, you win all 38. Now, that means we seat the 38 electors from the Republican Party. That's what that means when you vote in Texas. When you vote, what you're voting for is telling the electors from Texas, or really deciding which slate of electors from
Right.
Texas will go and vote for president in December. That's what you're actually voting for.
Okay. Now, a lot of people who don't understand that process, and that's why we're here to talk about it, have the feeling that ultimately that means my vote does not count, or feel that way, kind of like your new voters who went out and voted and don't understand why the most popular candidate did not win the election. What is your thoughts on that, having been kind of an expert in the political science area?
Well, one, I don't want anybody to ever think that their vote doesn't matter. Because it's not only about whether your candidate won. It's about what the numbers look like to the candidate who did win. If you look at a congressional district, and that congressional district of eligible voters is 30%, 18 to 35. But the people who show up are 65 plus, 55 plus. Those are the ones who showed up to vote. The person who won that congressional seat is probably going to act as those voters want them to act. They're going to give the Social Security benefits, they're going to increase, senior aid. They're probably not going to do much for our student loans for the kids who didn't show up to vote. So I want to get that clear. We should always vote. Now, when it comes to the Electoral College, does your vote matter? Your vote is telling the Electoral College your preference. But according to Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, the Electoral College's intent is to be a deliberative body. They're there to take that recommendation. But ultimately, it is those electors' decision on who they cast their vote for.
Okay, so let's talk about what happens if the majority of the electors do not vote for their sitting candidate.
Okay. Now, there's a question of what happens if neither candidate wins the 270 required votes to become president, or what happens if there's a mass defection from one candidate
Let's
to
talk
the
about
other.
a mass defection,
Okay.
since we're down to our last few minutes.
Okay.
And that's what we're looking at now. December 19th is the big day.
We've never had that happen. That is not something that we are prepared for. We have had something happen in which no one won the presidency outright. That's something we have a mechanism for. So I would envision lawsuits. Really? it would be definitely something we have not experienced if there was a mass defection to one candidate, allowing them to reach that 270
Right.
threshold to become president.
Massive chaos would
Yeah.
ensue.
I don't think that seems to be what the electors are trying to do. I think what it appears the electors are trying to do right now is cause the House of Representatives to make that decision. If no candidate gets 270 votes, then the House of Representatives will have to vote on the next president.
Okay, and we're not at that point now
No.
because we do have a candidate who got more than that.
We do have a
Okay.
candidate that got more than
So now that we're down to our last few minutes of the show and we've talked about the Electoral College and you've given a great discussion from your teaching experience, different levels of what the Electoral College is, how our electors are elected, and the intent of it, and it all seems to make pretty good sense. Let's talk about your opinion, and I'm going to let you close with some final thoughts on, do you think it's time to have a conversation about should we continue with this process?
I do think it's time that we have the conversation. And again, it goes back to the math question. Currently, if the argument is that we need the Electoral College to allow for states like Wyoming, states like Rhode Island, these small, less populated states to get attention, then we have to go and examine that math again. And right now, you have 240,000 registered voters in Wyoming per their 3 Electoral College votes. But you have 17 million voters in California to their 55. So if the argument is California would be too powerful, under the current Electoral College, states like Wyoming and those voters are there disproportionately too powerful. So I think the conversation does have to come. Do I think that we need to have only yes Electoral College or no popular vote? I think we should have a more detailed conversation than that. I think we can be more creative than that.
And there's the possibility of, as you might have mentioned earlier, percentage electoral and not winner take all. But there's different ways to discuss whether or not the electoral process should proceed or how it can proceed. And it's not a one or the other.
But it also needs to be a conversation that we're willing to have, and we need to start with, well, with the truth, with what the rules are right now. And I think there's been a lot of people talking over the Electoral College. They must do blank, when under the rules, they don't. So whether or not you believe that the Electoral College is good or bad, we have to at least admit that we're not currently playing by the same rules that are written, so it's about time to change them.
And I appreciate you coming and talking with us about the Electoral College and explaining how that process works, so we have a better understanding with that. And on Access to Justice, we're trying to promote progressive ideas and get the conversation started. So thank you for coming, Travis.
Thank you so much.
And as our final thought on Access to Justice, as we talked about the Electoral College, your vote does count. Whether your candidate wins or not, it still puts power behind what issues are important in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So make sure you get out and vote so you can be part of the process and continue with the conversation. For Access to Justice, I'm attorney Delia Parker Mims. Thank you for watching.